Give it a hand for Ty Roberts.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Andreas. All right, guys, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. What I'm going to focus on in 5 minutes is an observation with a challenge at the end of that I'd love to talk with you guys about over the next day or so to see if you have any ideas. I am VP of Marketing for Itron. Itron is an industrial IoT company that deploys solutions for utilities and for cities. We have 200 million communicating devices that we've deployed worldwide, 70 million of which are underneath networks that are either provided by Itron, that are either utility-owned or city-owned. I'm based in the US. A few years ago, I worked in Europe where we had the brilliant idea at Itron of trying to bring our next generation smart metering and smart grid solution with a distributed intelligence component to it to Europe, to take Europe by storm, and they had nothing to do with it. Didn't want to talk to us about it at all. They're all building their own, country by country, their own national specification, sometimes their own utility-centric specification. That's all about driving down lowest cost of devices, managing down to the bit the transactions within their network and into their back office. It's about specifying the solution and getting people to build cheap solutions for them. That's the focus in Europe. And it was incredibly frustrating trying to sell something that's not that to them. So very happy to come back to the US, North America a few years later, and having a lot of success now selling our lovely distributed intelligence-based solution, doing a lot of the things that George just described, because in this market, there is a premium placed on innovation. And there's a desire to have problems solved. We're not going to tell you as a utility, we're not going to tell vendors how to do that. We want you to bring the solution to us. It's a much more fun place for people like myself and vendors to work in because we can be innovative, we can be creative, we can think of how to solve problems. As a result of that, I think, in North America, we have in the utility sector in particular, I'd say an embarrassment of riches in terms of it's not just Itron solutions, but solutions by every type of vendor throughout the whole value chain of the utility, a ton of innovation, a ton of investment in innovation, and really, I think, market-leading, world-leading solutions from a utility perspective. I believe that. On the flip side of that, and I really saw this driven home for me the last couple of weeks as I did a tour of cities in Asia Pacific, is the smart city side of things, where there just has not been a level of investment in city solutions, smart infrastructure for cities, communities in particular, in North America. And I'm sure a few of you are going to come up to me later and say, you're not thinking about City X, and I'd love to hear those stories. I know there are exceptions, but it's absolutely not the rule. What was driven home for me was historically, we've done a lot of work on city deployment, smart city deployments in Europe, and I thought that that was sort of the pinnacle of innovation, the pinnacle of advancement from a smart community, smart connected community perspective is in Europe, and it's impressive what's being done in many places there. I was blown away by what we saw in Asia. In India, in particular, Pune city, which is a city a couple of hours drive outside of Mumbai, had a network operations center and a smart city control center, the likes of which I have never seen. It would be the envy of any utilities operations center. An incredible amount of technology that they've invested in and integrated together in a way that I've never seen anywhere else before. We saw the same thing in the city in Jakarta, in Indonesia. We saw the same thing in Singapore. So two of those regions are developing regions. Singapore obviously is not. Singapore is understandable in that their brand of Singapore is innovation. It's a country that is a city. They attract business. They attract conglomerates, global conglomerates. They want their headquarters there, so that completely makes sense. I was blown away by the level of national and federal investment in cities in Indonesia and in India. So Why is that? There's a dichotomy there where I think there's been an incredible amount of investment in utility infrastructure in this country and in North America. It hasn't happened on the city side. And I think there's a real risk of our cities being surpassed in terms of livability, of safety, of interconnectedness by these other countries around the world, places that you wouldn't have expected to. So my challenge and my ask of you guys that I'd love to talk about is how can we change some of that? I think there's no reason for that not to be happening here. The problem is funding, fundamentally. So whether this is public-private partnership, whether it's other metrics or other mechanisms that we can use to change that, I'd love to figure out how to do that because the technology exists, the solution exists, we've seen them deployed successfully elsewhere in the world. I'd love to see that brought here. So that's my observation, and that's my challenge, and I'd love to talk about that with you guys. Is that my 5 minutes? Pretty good, right? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.